without talking to them. I mean, would it be possible for somebody to support a reduction to the IRS budget because they simply believe the federal government ought to have a balanced budget? Would that be a fair position? Would that be a principled position?
Except that actually doesn't work with respect to defunding
But would it be a
IRS.
principled position?
It wouldn't be an accurate position because defunding
But you don't know because you
IRS
didn't talk to anybody, did you?
Well,
you just said it.
Defunding the IRS, the CBO agrees, everyone who's testifying today agrees that is going to add to deficit.
There is a risk of increasing the deficit with IRS budget cuts, which could affect macroeconomic indicators. This raises questions about whether the government can control its spending and avoid negative economic consequences. Do you think the government should reduce spending on the IRS if it will increase the deficit?
Could it be that a House Republican wanted to reduce the IRS's budget because they think that the IRS is a model of inefficiency and shouldn't be rewarded with more money?
Well,
could that have been a possibility, a motivation for the way they vote?
This question raises questions about the motivation of lawmakers. Are IRS budget cuts really intended to reduce inefficiencies, or could they lead to a weakening of the tax control system? What do you think? Should the IRS budget be cut for the sake of cutting costs, or could the public good be adversely affected?
Kennedy, I so appreciate that question because the reality
could that have been a motivation for the way they voted?
And it relates very closely to what Senator
Could that have been a motivation for the way they voted?
That you've seen an inefficient
Could that have
IRS.
been a motivation?
If you allow
for the
the
way
witness
they
to
voted?
answer, you might get your answer, Senator
It
Kennedy.
frankly couldn't have been.
It could or couldn't?
It could not have been.
How do you know you didn't talk to him?
Because the reason why you've seen
You just
IRS
made this statement that
hasn't been able.
every Republican in the House supports Israel only if it has been made easier for people to cheat on their taxes. Could it be that maybe a House member thought that, well, the more money we spend, the more deficits we have, and the more deficits we have, the more pressure is put on interest rates, and the higher interest rates go, the more it hurts the poor? Could that have been
Senator
the position
Kennedy,
of one of the House Republicans?
Senator Kennedy,
Could it have been theoretically?
Couldn't have been because
It
everyone
couldn't have
agrees.
been?
It frankly couldn't.
How do you know you didn't talk to him?
Well, I know that everyone agrees, including witnesses across the aisle, including CBO, including every single tax expert that has contemplated this question, that defunding the IRS makes deficits worse, not better. And so this is a deficit
I just find it,
measure.
Professor, appalling that you would make a statement like this, a vicious statement like this, without talking to a single person.
Ethics and accountability to constituents are key when discussing such decisions. Should legislators consider each position more carefully, consulting with colleagues and constituents before making decisions? It's important that legislators, representing the interests of their constituents, take an informed approach to each vote.
About whom you made this statement. And I'm going to remind you, you know, you can only be young once, but you can always be immature. And you ought to think about that.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Let me just say that I think that the treatment of witnesses is beginning to degrade a bit here. And I'm going to strike some commentary if it continues down this road. I think personal insults to witnesses are not appropriate, and I will not be tolerant of that in this committee.
Well, could I respond, Mr. Chairman? You're going to
fire away. I think you just called a
you're going to do what you got to do, but I'm going to continue to use my time. You bring witnesses as you're entitled to, and some of them are very good. Some of them have the credibility of Michael Avenatti, and I'm going to use my time when I think it's appropriate to test.
I'm going to use my authority as chairman
to test credibility, witnesses' credibility. So you do what you got to do, and I'm going to do what I got to do.
Good behavior in
But if that is meant to bully me, you're talking
no
to the
attempt to
wrong
bully
guy.
you. Okay. No attempt to bully you, none at all. It's to keep the witness and the committee free of bullying.
I believe Senator Kennedy still has a first-round opportunity, and I understand Senators Booker and Ossoff would like a second-round opportunity. Senator Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good to see you again, Senator.
I'm a big fan. Director Peters, you're the director of the Bureau of Prisons, is that right?
That's correct, sir.
You used to run the correction system in Oregon, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Oregon legalized drugs, is that right?
That's correct.
Oregon's about to reverse that, is that correct?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the policy proposed to reverse that.
Oh, you just ignored Oregon?
Oregon still has a very special place in my heart, sir.
Okay. You haven't read any of the articles about the reversal?
I haven't, Senator.
You don't know anything about it?
Correct, sir.
Okay, wow. You're in charge of implementing the First Step Act, Director?
That's correct.
How many criminals have you released under the First Step Act?
So First Step Act for the overall release since the initiation of the First Step Act is, I have that exact number in front of me.
The lack of accurate data on recidivism among released prisoners calls into question the effectiveness of the rehabilitation program. Without reliable information, it is difficult to assess whether the program is helping prisoners adapt to society. Do you think rehabilitation programs could be improved through more rigorous monitoring and data analysis?
You don't know off the top of your head?
Sorry, Senator. So 70% of those that were released, we have about 30,000 individuals that have been released since the passage of the First Step Act.
All right, so you've released 30,000 criminals under the First Step Act. Okay? And how many of them, before you released them, did you contact any of their victims to say we're about to let this guy out?
Senator, it's my understanding that that notification happens through the U.S. Attorney's Office, but I will check into that and get back to you.
You don't know?
Senator, I don't.
Have you followed up with the U.S. attorneys to say, do you have a system to say, hey, we're about to let this guy out? Would we want to be sure the victim's contacted?
As a former victim's advocate, I share that value, that victim notification should happen. I'll check on the process.
But you don't know if it's happening?
That's correct, Senator.
Wow. Okay, of the 30,000 criminals you let free, how many of them have come back? Have committed a crime again, hurt somebody else?
So that number is one that we're still looking at as it relates to the recidivism rate for those that were released on the First Step Act.
You don't have any idea?
No, Senator.
You don't have anybody at the Bureau that can count?
I do not have that number in front of me today,
So let me get
Senator.
this straight. The First Step Act was passed in 2018. This is 2024, am I right so far?
That's correct.
That's 6 years. And in 6 years, you've let 30,000 criminals go, right?
That's correct.
And you don't have the slightest idea how many of them committed another crime and came back.
I don't have that number in front of me today,
And you
sir.
run the Bureau of Prisons.
That's correct.
And how many employees do you have?
About 40,000 employees.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. General, I know you got a lot to do, but could you give us a hand here? And let's find out whether the First Step Act worked. And how many, if we've released 30,000 criminals after 6 years, our director here doesn't know how many have committed another crime and come back? Can you help us?
Senator, I can certainly follow up on that issue. I will just say in terms of work we've done in the past, for example, on compassionate release, and going to the Bureau of Prisons, this is before Director Peters was there, and asking them for data on compassionate release, because that was one of the issues that has come up.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I'm not talking about compassionate release.
No, I understand.
You know,
I'm
my
just saying-
colleagues said we were told that it would save money and it would be in the interest of public safety to release criminals from prison. I didn't vote for it, but the majority rules. And so Congress did it. And Ms. Peters, Director Peters at the Bureau of Prisons, and her colleagues released 30,000 criminals, all of whom are there for a reason, okay? They didn't just go to prison for a free toaster. They were there for a reason. And so her department let them go. And after 6 years, we don't have the slightest idea, not a single one of the 40,000 of her employees know how many have committed a second crime and come back. So how the hell are we supposed to figure out whether it worked? Your people ought to hide their head in a bag, Director, that you can't come here in front of this Congress and answer that question. I'm sorry, I interrupted you with my speech.
No, that's okay. I was just going to, my bottom line point on it was, I've often looked to those questions on things like compassionate release and other programs. And one of the challenges we found is the department just doesn't have good data on that. Halfway houses. Congress is spending about $500 million a year on halfway houses. There's really not great recidivism data on that either.
Well,
how well are they working?
Before we do this, we need to find out. Look, I believe in justice. I believe in treating everybody fairly. But there are people out there, I don't know why, if I make it to heaven, I'm going to ask. They're not mixed up. They're not confused. They're not sick. It's not that their mama or daddy didn't love them or not enough. They just hurt other people, and they take other people's stuff, and we have to separate them from society. And the director let 30,000 of these folks go and can't tell me today how many have come back. I just find it takes my breath away. With 40,000 people. How many of your 40,000 people are actually coming to work or are still working from home, Director?
The supermajority of our employees come to work every day because we're running 24/7
What percentage are coming to work every day?
The percentage is quite high. I don't have the exact
You don't
number,
know?
But the
Well, maybe there's your problem.
the supermajority of our individuals come
If they're
to
not
work
coming
at
to
our
work, they
institutions.
can't give us the answer. I've gone over. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. This is why people hate government and don't trust government.
So I'd like to respond concerning the Grassley-Durbin First Step Act signed into law by President
I
Donald
thought
Trump.
you might have a response.
By President Donald Trump. I almost want to repeat that because this notion that it's soft on crime, I don't consider Chuck Grassley soft on crime. I don't consider Donald Trump soft on crime. Let me tell you the numbers that we have. Some 30,000 released. The recidivism rate for people released under the First Step Act is 12.4%. 7 out of every 8 individuals released under the law have not been rearrested or charged with a new crime. By comparison, DOJ estimates that in the decade before the First Step Act was passed, 43% of the people formerly incarcerated in BOP were rearrested within 3 years of their release. Is the First Step Act working? I would submit it is.
Would you yield for a question, Mr. Chair?
When I finish.
I'm sorry.
Excuse
me for interrupting.
The point I'm making is we decided with the Trump administration and Senator Grassley's leadership that we were going to take a different approach to releasing people from prison. We would give them an opportunity to be trained, educated, skilled, in many ways more prepared for release, because 80%, I believe, in the system are going to be released someday. We don't want to commit another crime or create another victim. I would submit this is a success. Don't put your head in a bag, or whatever Senator suggested. Stand up tall and try to make it better, and I'm ready to do that. But the First Step Act was a constructive reform of the penal system, and I think it was a good idea and stand by it. I'll submit to your question.
Thank you. And I appreciate, as usual, Dick, you made good points. Here's my point. I didn't vote for the First Step Act because I was afraid this was going to happen. And what I hear you saying is that of the 30,000 that the director released, over 3,000 committed another crime and are back. Here's my question. How come you know that and she doesn't?
Because she's probably looking
And the
for
40,000 people at the Bureau of Prisons who are supposed to give us this information don't know.
Well, I'd like to say in all fairness, she's under oath, and I think when you ask for numbers, she wants to make sure she tells you a number she can live with. I have this information. I think it's probably close to being 100% accurate, but I wouldn't say under oath it is. So I think give her fair opportunity to respond. I mean, it just might not be the type of thing that comes
But
rolling
you're
off
not
the tongue.
it's not your job, and I appreciate the information, and I'd like to see the study that shows that. I just don't understand why the director has no idea.
Well-
She didn't say she was uncertain, and she wanted to go back and check. She said, I don't know. And I just find that extraordinary.
The issues of the effectiveness of the system of punishment and rehabilitation of the prisoners remain relevant. Given the criticism, it is important to provide a more transparent approach to the rehabilitation of prisoners in order to reduce recidivism and create conditions for their successful adaptation in society. Do you think the punishment system should focus more on rehabilitation, or is strict punishment more important to reduce crime?
I'm assuming since she's under oath that it's an honest answer. We have two other individuals who are seeking a second round. I believe Senator Booker is first.
I hate to distract from my questions, but I just